Ah, we're live. I love
I
this.
think you're supposed to scream.
This is what happens when you put me in charge. This is amazing. Welcome, everybody. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited for today's event. Before I go even further off the rails and dive right in, I need to do a little bit of housekeeping though. So first, we're going to be hiding and silencing the audience during the event, and that's a way that keeps me focused and our guest focus, and we'll be taking Q&As and open it up for them. So if you have a question, you'll have an opportunity to pop it in the Q&A section. We just ask, you gotta help keep us on track with that. We have lots of time to answer questions. So if you want to know like Imani's thoughts on, I don't know, the upcoming season of Doctor Who or something, maybe save that for Twitter. Trying to keep it focused to the courts, and we will do our best to get to everyone's questions. But again, you know where to find us on social media, so you can always hit us up there too. We've also added some helpful information located to the chat section of our program. And so if you do experience any technical difficulties throughout, I really sincerely hope that does not happen. But if it does, please email events@rewirenewsgroup.com, where we have a staff member standing by to help. So that's the housekeeping. Now we can actually dive into the fun stuff. I am so excited to welcome Elie Mystal, the justice correspondent for The Nation. He's with us, and Imani Gandy, who needs no introduction here. She is my co-host at Boom Lawyered and senior editor here at Rewire News Group. We are very excited about this. She is overseeing all our courts coverage, and we are here to talk about, well, it's bananas. Maybe you've noticed that a little bit is happening when it comes to the courts and the country right now, and we're going to try and dive in and tackle some of that in an hour. We can do this. I feel pretty solid about that. So let's set the scene a little bit. People are voting. There are voting lawsuits happening. The Supreme Court hears oral arguments as of Monday in cases, and within a month, we'll be hearing arguments in 2 cases that could determine the fate of 20 million people who currently have insurance under the Affordable Care Act, a host of families who are hoping to adopt kids and happen to be queer families and may or may not have that opportunity depending on what the court says there. And in the background of all of that is Amy Coney Barrett and a nomination fight that is on steroids, if I could be so bold. Wow, we could have nothing happening. We could not have a nomination fight, and just the Affordable Care Act case that I mentioned alone and the city of Philadelphia versus Fulton, the foster care ban case, would make this a pretty big term to begin with. But Amy Coney Barrett, this nomination fight really just changes the dynamic altogether. So I know that's one of the things that folks are really going to want to talk about, and we should just cut right to the chase. How does Amy Coney Barrett's nomination impact the start of the Supreme Court's term, in your opinion, Elie?
Well, it depends on the case. I think she has a fairly large impact on the ACA decision, more than anything, right? One of the things that people need to understand is what happens when the court is 8-8, right? Is 8. That means the lower court decision is the thing that stands. The way that the ACA case is presented, it's coming up from the Fifth Circuit, where the Fifth Circuit ruled that the individual mandate was unconstitutional, and the district court ruled that because the individual mandate is unconstitutional, they called it, Judge Reed O'Connor called it the keystone of the healthcare law. Because the individual mandate is unconstitutional, then the whole ACA has to come down with it. This is the legal question of severability, which some of you, I'm sure, have heard, right? So that's where it stands now. To overturn a lower court decision requires a majority of the court. It requires 5 votes. You can't overturn a decision with just 4 votes if you end up with a tie, right? So even though I think there was a lot of hope that Chief Justice John Roberts would save the ACA again, somehow, some way, he'd find a way to do it, that just brings you to 4 now. So if John Roberts decides that the individual mandate is still constitutional, that just gives you 4 votes. that would mean that the Fifth Circuit decision would stand. If you put Amy Coney Barrett, or really anybody the Trump administration would have nominated, on the court in time to hear and sit for that case, now you've got 5 votes to uphold, most likely, the unconstitutionality of the individual mandate. If the court rules that the individual mandate is in fact unconstitutional, what happens with severability is a little bit more complicated, because the Fifth Circuit didn't kind of like Reed O'Connor did, but the Fifth Circuit didn't directly rule about severability. It just gets very complicated after that. But the thing that the kind of top line news that people should know is that the ACA is in critical danger. Roberts no longer is enough to help. And anybody that Trump gets on the court in time to hear this case is likely to be the final nail in the coffin for the entire law.
And this is such an important point, because the court has control over when it hears and schedules cases, and this case is scheduled a week after the election. And so, Imani, that puts a different context around the rush to confirm this particular nominee, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's just appalling what's happening. I mean, like you said in the upfront, people are voting now. Hundreds of people have voted already. And so this idea that they're going to rush through a nomination when 4 years ago they held Scalia's seat open for 11 months on some ridiculous claim that, well, we have to wait until the American people choose a new president. 11 months. They're trying to confirm Amy Coney Barrett like a week before the election. And I just find it appalling, and I find Senate Democrats' reaction to it to be way too muted. I feel like they need to be going ham. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what they need to do, but they need to be thinking outside the box, because right now what they're doing is they're pleading with Republicans and talking about honor. And I've been watching some of these Senate Judiciary Committee hearings, and yes, Amy Klobuchar really went in on Ted Cruz, but ultimately that doesn't mean anything, right? You can say as much as you want and be as forceful as you want in a hearing, but if you don't have a tangible way to actually stop this from going forward, then it's just words.
Yeah. And
I'm tired of words. I want action.
But I will say, I guess, in defense of the Senate Democrats, which is not ever a position I really want to be in, there just isn't a lot they can do. If you look at the timeline here, I can come up with a series of stunts, of quorum calls and fake impeachment delay tactics. I can get us to November 3rd. I can get us to the election. But Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell have said they are willing to push through this nominee through the lame duck, which, just by the way, would be a massively undemocratic thing to do, where you could have potentially a president who's already been voted out of office and senators who've already been voted out of office voting to confirm a lifetime appointee who will likely serve for 40 years. It's mind-blowing how anti-democratic it would be for them to push it through in the lame duck. But if they are hell-bent on pushing it through the lame duck, I can't get the Democrats all the way to January 20th.
That's true.
You know, I can get them through Election Day, and I quite frankly do not think they are doing enough to get through Election Day. But I can't extend them all the way to the 20th with parliamentary tricks, right? And so where I tend to have problems with the Democrats is not just on their kind of rhetorical and moral inaction right now, but it's on the failure to coalesce around the only reasonable thing to do should Coney Barrett be pushed through and we have a 6-3 Republican court, right? Like the only response then, from the perspective of you take power on January 20th, is court expansion, and Democrats' kind of failure to understand that is really frustrating.
I have to agree. And, you know, Jessica and I have sort of been a little bit like, when it comes to court expansion, not because we don't think it's a good idea. At least for me, it's not because I don't think it's a good idea. It's because I'm cynical about Democrats' ability to actually do something that bold. But I've been trying to be more positive. This is a new, like, I'm a mildly irritated black lady now instead of just angry one. And really what would have to happen, as Elie said, is if Democrats are able to take back the entire government, then they need to immediately expand the courts. I'm not talking about waiting until they overturn Trump's executive orders. They need to do it immediately because, as you said, there are cases this term that depend on there not being a 6-3 supermajority. And now I'm not sure, I mean, I'm sure that the court would be able to do some kind of finagling to make sure that the new seated justices wouldn't hear the case, but I can't think of anything else, and it's driving me batty.
So I really appreciate, Imani, the fact that you tied together court expansion and supermajority, because, you know, Elie brought up what happens with the Affordable Care Act case in a tie and the difference that an Amy Coney Barrett confirmation plays in that case as a critical fifth vote. I, in the upfront, also mentioned the City of Philadelphia and Fulton case, and that is one where, you know, John Roberts was less seen as a central vote in this case. He is really bad in these particular issues, and so this is a case where advocates could really be looking at a 6-3 conservative win. And what does that affect? The effect of a conservative supermajority in areas like LGBTQ rights and abortion rights. What does that, for the folks who aren't lawyers involved in this conversation, what does that mean? Is it really that different than 5-4? And how can we explain that, yeah, it is?
Yeah, I don't even think we were that close on Fulton County. I think that case was 7-2 before, while RBG was alive, and I think it's 8-1 now.
Wow.
And
why do you say that?
And that, well, because the kind of case that they're bringing is something we've actually seen before. The key legal issue in Fulton is that the religious right wants to say that their freedom of religion, the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, is so robust that it allows them to force the state to be discriminatory and bigoted against the LGBT community. Right? Like that's their actual argument, that in order to be free in my religion, I must be allowed to be bigoted against you, and the state has to support that. Mm-hmm. All right? That's not the first time they've made this argument. They made basically the same argument in Trinity Lutheran, which involved whether or not funds could go to a religious school before all the other public schools got the money. And they basically made the same argument in Masterpiece Cake, which was, you know, the case of the same-sex couple who tried to buy a cake and were denied their constitutional rights. Both Masterpiece Cake and Trinity Lutheran came down 7-2. And what we've seen from Stephen Breyer and Elena Kagan, my full disclosure, I had her for law school, so I'm kind of biased and I like her. But what we've unfortunately seen from them is a willingness to join the religious right on these issues in order to try to kind of limit their doctrines and really make it fact specific to the case in front of them, but fundamentally accept the premise that there is some version of the free exercise clause that allows for state-sponsored bigotry, right? Fulton County is gonna be, I think, the worst articulation of that, where they're gonna the religious right wants to force Philadelphia to take wards of the state, foster children. I mean, remember, when you think about this case, remember, these are kids that in some cases have been taken away from their birth parents.
Right.
Because the state has a compelling interest to protect them from child abuse or protect them from drug use, or, you know, they are wards of the state. And the religious right wants to force Philadelphia to allow Catholic social services to place those wards of the state along bigoted lines. Now, that is a ridiculous, to me, expansion of the free exercise clause, but I think it is likely that we will see two of Kagan and Breyer side with the religious conservatives in another attempt to really limit this argument, cable it to the foster care adoption case. And I think we're going to be looking at an 8-1, if Coney Barrett's on the court, I think we're going to be looking at an 8-1 decision with dissent from Sotomayor, which will be like fire. I mean, like,
I'm already excited to read it.
But like, I think it's an 8-1 case.
But doctrinally, let's talk about what that means, right? Because we, you know, have spent, as advocates, have spent a lot of time, for example, crafting constitutional arguments for more or less one man, Anthony Kennedy, right? You mentioned Masterpiece Cake Shop. That entire case was argued to Anthony Kennedy. right? And we've seen that in the abortion cases too. And so, we've got a potential abortion case that the court might take up. There's the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists versus the FDA petition that they haven't acted on. And advocates filed a petition today with the Supreme Court in the Title X gag rule fight. So this is swirling. What kind of arguments can we make now to a court that might be, 6-3 or, oh my God, 8-1? What does that look like?
And if I could ask you to answer another question, because I'm just so excited to have you here talking, so I'm never going to let you get off camera. But, in Masterpiece Cake Shop, as Jess said, that case was argued to Anthony Kennedy. And part of the argument was that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had been too mean to these religious folks, right? The way that they talked about bigotry made them have a case of the SADS, right? And so, and I understand that that's part of the argument in the city of Philadelphia, is that the city of Philadelphia, they are arguing that the city of Philadelphia, in rejecting this idea that they can place foster children along bigoted lines, are somehow being mean to Catholics, right? They're not respecting their religion. And so how do you, when it comes to someone who is arguing for religious freedom and then someone who's arguing against that, saying, no, this is religious imposition, how is it that the religious right and these Christian evangelicals always come out on top? Because I guarantee we're living under a Muslim ban right now. So how are we talking about religious freedom when we have barred certain people in certain religious groups from entering this country? That I can't square that circle for me, Elie, please.
I can't. They're hypocrites. I don't know. The religious right on the court are hypocrites. We saw this, I think, really obviously in a series of kind of death penalty cases that came up 2 years ago, right? It was a series of cases where basically people were asking for last rites. People were asking to have a spiritual advisor in with them before they were murdered by the state. Now, when they asked for an imam, when a Muslim person asked for an imam, and that imam was not provided for them, they sued. And the Supreme Court, I thought, callously rejected that lawsuit, that this Muslim person should get an imam. Yet when a Christian person asked for a spiritual advisor of their faith, the Supreme Court said, oh, that should probably be fine. And the way that the Supreme Court squared the circle was to say, you know what, how about this? The way that the state of Alabama squared the circle so that they didn't have to give Muslim prisoners their spiritual advisors under a Supreme Court ruling that allowed a Christian person to get a spiritual advisor, was to say, guess what? Nobody gets a spiritual advisor. These people are so bigoted that they would rather cut off their nose to spite their face, right? They would rather not have Christians get to talk to a priest if it can stop a Muslim getting to talk to their imam. That's where they are, kind of morally speaking. Intellectually speaking, where we are right now, if Amy Coney Barrett gets on the court and the Democrats don't do what they have to do in terms of expanding the court, we're in a world where Neil Gorsuch is your swing justice, folks. God. Where you literally, and this is how deeply the conservatives have won, where you literally have to make arguments to Neil Gorsuch on completely originalist, founding intent, textualist grounds in order to have any hope of your case proceeding. So when Gorsuch last term goes with the liberals and Roberts in the Bostock case, which ruled that gay and lesbian people and transgender people were in fact protected by Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. When Neil Gorsuch goes there, those are the kinds of arguments you have to make and you have to hope for in order to have victories for rights. And that is a tough road. That is why I'm saying the Democrats have to expand the court. There's no real other option here, because the hypocrisy that these people live with they're comfortable with it. They think it's okay. They think that Amy Coney Barrett is an example of a Christian theocratic view of the law, and she is not alone. That's also where Brett Kavanaugh comes from. That's also where White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany comes from, who went to Harvard Law School, although she doesn't always sound like it.
That's surprising.
What they want is this theocratic imposition upon secular law, and so they have no shame, they have no intellectual consistency when it comes to applying these rules. There is no way to square the circle.
Okay, so we see and know this threat, and you have put such a clear and fine point on it, and the answer seems to be to respond in kind, to fix the court, right? So what does that look like? This is, I'm giving you the mic because I want to hear all about this.
I'm a big fan of court expansion. Now, there are two kinds of arguments. I'm going to dispense with the first one quickly. One is the vengeance argument, right? McConnell denied Merrick Garland a spot and then proved that denial was hypocritical by putting Amy Coney Barrett on the court. At the very least, we get 2 justices out of that. And maybe we make 4 just to stick the, just to plunge the knife in a little bit deeper. I'm fine with that. I am fine with expanding the court on strict vengeance, right? That's okay. However, there's also, to me, a great reform argument for increasing the number of justices on the court, which is why I do not favor court expansion for +2 or +4. I want +10 or +20. Here's the reform argument. Number one, can we all agree that what we do right now is broken?
Yeah.
Can we just all agree that the rights and liberties of American citizens should not hang on the random health problems of 80-year-old people? Like that just doesn't make sense, right? Mm-hmm. It should not be an existential crisis for the party out of power if one of these people happens to die when they don't hold the White House and the Senate. That just shouldn't be, that wasn't what was intended. And I'm not a big fan of what the slavers and colonists that wrote the Constitution intended, but certainly this was not it. Yes. All right? If you had 19 people on the Supreme Court, 29 people on the Supreme Court, which, by the way, is no bigger than the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, so it's not like we don't have appellate courts with vastly more people. If you had more people on the court, then the random wheel of death would not lurch our politics to the left or to the right, or like it just wouldn't. Yeah. It would be, the Supreme Court would remain important, but each individual justice would be less important, and that's good. We could get back to just like, I think that's a good judge, and move on with our lives, which would be better for everybody, right? The second thing, and I deal with this with moderates all the time, because moderates, people who and people who don't have a great understanding of how the court works, they always want to say like, oh, well, we want a moderate judge. We want a mainstream judge. And they hold up Anthony Kennedy as like, look at our swing justice. Man, Anthony Kennedy was not a moderate. He happened to break with his party on issues of gay rights, and for that, I give him credit. But this man was a First Amendment absolutist extremist. This is the man that wrote Citizens United, all right? Anthony Kennedy gave you the 5th vote for the Muslim ban, gave you the 5th vote for Heller DC, which ruined gun rights. So Anthony Kennedy, while responsible for expanding gay rights, has ruined gun regulation, ruined campaign finance reform, and made an atrocious ban on Muslim people coming to this country possible, all right? That's not a moderate to me. And that's the thing about justices. None of them are actually moderate. Right. They have issues that they care about deeply. They have issues they care about less. They're kind of all over the map, right? There is no moderation when it comes to judging, but there are moderate opinions. And the way you get moderate opinions is when you have to write in a way that is going to appeal to a majority of your colleagues. Now, I promise you, if we had 29 people on the Supreme Court, writing an opinion that survives so you can get 15 people on board, that's a completely different opinion than just trying to get 5 people on board. I don't care if even all you have to do is get 15 Republicans on board. Try to give me a decision that gets 15 Republicans on board, and I promise you it will be a better decision than one that only has to get 5. All right, and obviously the same is true on the other side, right? So, and that's in a world where the court is 15-14 or 16-13, which again, with the random wheel of death, we don't actually know what happened, right? So if you have more justices, what you fundamentally get are more limited, more moderate, less wild, less crazy decision making. It is, again, better for the country. Why does precedent exist at all? Why is stare decisis a thing at all? Well, the reason why is a thing, because you want to live in a world where you wake up on Monday with the same laws that you had on Sunday. Like that's the bottom line, right? Yeah, you want consistency in the law, and if the law changes, you want it to change slowly over time, not rapidly all at once. And again, that is what more justices do for our country. So vengeance, absolutely, let's take some vengeance. Yes. But also, let's reform the court at its structural level so this doesn't happen again. My last little point here. Everybody says, oh, well, if you pack the court, well, then the Republicans will just pack the court, and blah, 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 blah. Mitch McConnell, I'll give you a deal. I'm going to put 20 more justices on the court. Now, if you work with me and you give me votes for it, we'll split them, because you got the 2 with Garland. So we'll split them, 12-8. If you don't work with me, I'm putting 20 fire-breathing liberals up your backside for the rest of your natural life, Mitch.
You can say ass, Elie. You can say ass.
Like that, but you see what I'm saying? Like that is a political conversation I would like to have with a minority leader, Mitch McConnell. You give me votes for this, and you can have some of these justices. You do not give me votes, and your only option will be to win back the House and win back the Senate and win back the White House, and then find 40 more to put on top of the 20 that I just put on top. Like, let's go, Mitch. Like that is hardball, and that is what the Democrats have to start playing. That is how you start to win some of these arguments.
But but that's my concern, is that Democrats don't have the ovaries to go that hard, and I feel like it's going to be up to basically you to just paper the airwaves with this sort of righteousness, because I agree with you, and I want to add another point, because there are going to be people who think, well, it's not fair. I mean, just because you lost and now you want to reform the courts because you lost. It's not. If the court weren't so overwhelmingly partisan, not have a problem we are today. Your points notwithstanding, which are excellent points, but if the Federalist Society, once Amy Coney Barrett is seated, weren't responsible for every single Republican sitting on the bench, I might be in a place to think that maybe we could get someone like a David Souter, who was appointed by a Republican and then ends up voting with the liberals, or John Paul Stevens. But the reason why we don't have any more David Souters or John Paul Stevenses is because the Federalist Society won't allow it, right? The Federalist Society said, we're not doing this again. We're not gonna roll the dice on some Republican appointee who's then gonna end up, smoking weed with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in her garage and then gonna turn into a liberal who favors abortion rights. Oh no, we're gonna make sure that we have you from the day that you graduate from Liberty University School of Law, join the Federalist Society with all the other conservatives and libertarians, and then after 3 years of teaching at Notre Dame, never trying a case, never practicing law, never really doing anything, we're going to put you on the Supreme Court at the age of 48.
The organization that has done the most damage to American politics, everybody knows. It's called Fox News. Like, everybody knows that they are objectively the worst force in our political discourse. The Federalist Society is number 2. Mm-hmm. And people don't know that. What the Federalist Society does is that it grooms not just conservative justices, which I would spend easily the rest of my life disagreeing with, but they groom intellectually dishonest ones. And that's where the problem comes in. They groom people that have no core value other than Republicans win all the time. Originalism, which is a great bumper sticker, because it sounds, for white people, it sounds so awesome, right? Like, oh, we're just going to go back to the original intent of the colonists and slavers that wrote the Constitution. What's wrong with that? Who could have a problem with that? We're just going to look at the actual text of these slaveholding jerk faces that wanted to not let women vote. Who would have a problem? It works great on a bumper sticker. But let me tell you a couple things about originalism. Number one, nobody's got a goddamn Ouija board, right? Nobody can go call up Thomas Jefferson or James Madison and actually ask them what they thought or what they would have thought about some issue right now. And if you did go and find Thomas Jefferson or James Madison to talk about what is happening now, they would be like, oh my God, what's that thing in the sky? What is that? Like, they've got nothing to add to our current discussion, number one.
Right.
You can tell they have nothing to add because it's the Federal Society Ouija board that says magically, not only does the original intent exist, but that always agrees with Republicans. Wow, isn't that lucky that every single time they go back, they go to the videotape, the old dead white people magically agree with the current Republican Party agenda, right? That's how you can tell it's bullcrap, all right?
Yes.
The other thing that they do, though, that I find just so cynical is that I said earlier about how important precedent was to our legal system. The Federal Society doesn't have precedent, right? Like the things that they want are unprecedented for the most part. So they don't rely on precedent. They rely on law review articles. And again, without legal training, it's hard to see how bullcrap this is. But like they'll have like Amy Coney Barrett write a law review article about something, and then have Neil Gorsuch cite Amy Coney Barrett's law review article as a reason for why this original intent thing has actually existed from the founding of the country. It's bullcrap laden on top of bullcrap lacquered with some more bullcrap. And they teach people how to do this.
Yeah.
They start in law school. Folks, I went to Harvard Law School. If I had shown any Republican curious ideas in law school, which I did not, but if I had, they would have gotten me as a 1L. They would have told me who to clerk for, where to work. They would have marshaled my career through the very complicated process of clerking and grooming yourself to be a federal judge. And right now, at 42 years old, I would be sitting on a circuit court of appeals, and my name would be bandied about as being on the short list to replace Clarence Thomas, because of course I'm black, so I have to only replace a black guy. That's how it works.
That's how it goes. Those are the rules.
But they would have found me in the year 2000, and the last 20 years of my life would have been grooming me for that moment. All right, that's how the Federal Society goes. There are stories about Leonard Leo, who's in charge of the Federal Society, just basically making sure that he has a conversation with every conservative law student at Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Michigan. Like they groom these people from the grave, so that from the cradle, so that they don't know how to think any other way. And that's why you don't get the Souters or the Stevens or the people who look at the law on a case-by-case basis, because they're entirely agenda driven. And that's what they're about, and that's what Amy Coney Barrett is about. Every decision she makes is part of a larger agenda for other decisions she wants to make. She doesn't look at things on a case-by-case basis, because guys, if you looked on things on a case-by-case basis, Republicans don't win all the time. Democrats don't win all the time. I just told you about how these critical issues of religious right, of gay and lesbian adoption rights will probably be joined by two liberals.
Yeah.
I disagree with them, but it's an indication that their thinking is not solely about one particular political ideology or agenda, and the Federalist Society just doesn't allow their people to think that way.
Okay, so this is amazing. We can go on forever, but we have questions lining up, and I want to make sure that we get an opportunity to address some of them, because they are segueing with what we're talking about. A lot has to do with court reform, so that's where I'm going to start. We got one from Issa. In addition to expanding the court, should Dems in Congress seek to implement term limits for justices if they win the Senate in the White House while holding on to the House? Or do you think term limits for justices are a bad idea?
So I like term limits. I think that the Constitution was written as a time where people could die from pissing off Aaron Burr. People live longer now. We've got Robitussin, like
put some tussin on it,
right? Like there's no reason for people to serve for 30 or 40 years on the court. That was not what was intended. And I think that they're constitutional. I understand that the Constitution says the judges should serve while in good behavior, but there are lots of interesting ways to make them take senior status. That's what we do on lower courts. You reach a certain age, you're still technically a member of the court, so you're still appointed for life. You don't gotta work as much. and kind of give you we send you to a nice farm upstate once you get to a certain age. I think that works with the constitutional framework. The problem is I'm not on the Supreme Court,
right? And that is the
nine people who are get to tell me if term limits are constitutional, and they do not think that they're constitutional. Again, this is a situation where liberals don't understand how far behind we are. I count, from my reading the tea leaves, I count one justice who is even term limit curious, and that's Stephen Breyer. The rest of them have actually been completely silent or come out against them, or suggested that they were against them, right? So I think if you put a term limit bill through Congress, that gets overruled by the court right now, 8-1. All right? If you want term limits, what you want is court expansion. Because what you do is that you take 10 justices who want term limits and you put them on the court, and suddenly you have a majority of justices who think that your term limit bill is the thing that's constitutional. This goes through everything that we're going to talk about in terms of really interesting court reform. There are some great ideas for court reform. None of it can survive a Supreme Court that doesn't want it, except expanding the number of justices. The reason why we know expanding the number of justices is okay is because we've literally done it before. John Adams changed the number, Thomas Jefferson changed the number, Andrew Jackson changed the number, Andrew Johnson changed the number. Like, the number of justices has been changed before. Term limits have never been okay. And people are, oh, we should make DC and Puerto Rico a state. Guess who's going to nullify the statehood for DC and Puerto Rico? A 6-3 Republican court. Like, you can go down the list of reforms and things that you might want as a liberal or progressive. The 6-3 Supreme Court stops all of that. The 13-7 Supreme Court doesn't.
Yeah.
So what about the flip side to that argument, which I've heard, and there are a couple questions in the queue on that, which is court expansion is one answer, impeaching justices is another. We've heard this around since Brett Kavanaugh showed up. What do you think about impeachment?
I mean, what was the last one that was impeached? Samuel Chase? In 1830 something or another?
I was promised in 2018, when I pulled the lever for every Democrat I could find, that what I would get was a thorough investigation into Brett Kavanaugh's alleged rape attempts, a thorough investigation into all of his friends who never had to testify under oath, a thorough investigation into his goddamn calendar, which is not exculpatory evidence, a thorough investigation into the 83 ethics complaints that were made against that man that were thrown out on a rail by John Roberts. I was promised a thorough investigation to that, and I never got one. So my belief that the Democrats have the stomach to relitigate Brett Kavanaugh is low. And if you can't relitigate an alleged attempted rapist on the court who has also been accused of lying in front of Congress multiple times, if you can't relitigate that, what are you going to do about Neil Gorsuch, who's just an asshole? He ain't doing anything, right? He's just a prick.
Yeah.
But we're gonna, so when you talk about what it would take for the Democrats to actually impeach one of these people, that I don't think we have the stomach to do.
Yeah. Imani, you got anything to add on that?
No, I mean, what am I going to possibly add besides the fact that it's only ever happened once?
Yeah.
So people, and people will say this on Twitter, well, we could just impeach them all. That's just not going to happen. And I know I promised them a happier Black lady. That's one thing that's never going to happen. So we can all just lay that to rest.
Imani, can we also say, even if you got rid of 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices, what about all the lower court justices? Donald Trump, by the end of his term, will have appointed over 200 circuit and district court federal judges. These people also serve for life. These people also make most of the law that we live under are made by these people, right? And you can't do anything about that. You're not going to go. You're not going to go start kicking off Trump judges from the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which he flipped in 2019, or the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Florida, which he flipped in 2018. Like, you're not going to do it. What you're going to do, what you can do, is expand the number of justices on the lower court circuits. I think we should have court expansion for the Supreme Court. I think we should also have it for the district courts. We are actually overdue. We have literally expanded the number of either just the number of circuit courts or the number of justices on circuit courts about once every 20, 30 years. But the country gets bigger. There are more cases. We're a litigious society. It just has always happened kind of naturally. The last time we expanded the number of district court judges was under Jimmy Carter. That's 40 years ago. We're due for an expansion of the district courts. So again, my court packing does not stop at the Supreme Court. It goes up and down the system.
And I just wanted to raise a point that, I think Jess has made multiple times, but since she's moderating, I'm going to make it for her, which is that, we talk so much about the wonky nature of the court and court reform and how cases get through, but a lot of times what gets lost are the people who are bringing these cases, who are asking the federal courts for a remedy for something that has wronged them, or from somebody, usually some corporation, that they have been wronged and they deserve a chance in court. And right now, it takes 4 to 5 years to get there. And so not only are we delaying justice for people, we're running up attorney's fees for these people. And it's just, I think that gets lost a lot in this conversation about court expansion.
There are two issues that bind the Republican Party together. Like, the Trump judges are particularly crazy when it comes to the culture war issues, the no gay rights and no women's rights and black people why and all that stuff.
Black people why?
That's the Trump judge thing. But the thing that binds a Trump judge with a Bush judge with a Reagan judge are two things. One, hostility to voting rights, and two, hostility to access to the courts.
Yeah.
John Roberts' court already has been called the most pro-business court in American history. And one of the ways that it is so pro-business is by forcing arbitration, closing off the courthouse, making it harder and harder and harder for people to even sue to get their rights heard. That's a through line through all these Republicans, and it has deleterious effects on people who are trying to defend their rights. Because if you cannot sue for your right, if you cannot force a larger, more powerful entity to respect your rights, then you don't have them. In 1957, in the Dred Scott decision, Chief Justice Roger Taney, while ruling that Dred Scott, a free man, was still essentially a slave, he said, a black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. In our current situation, the Roberts Court basically rules a man has no right that a corporate man is bound to respect. That's where we are. And that's been a through line from all of these Republicans appointed for the past 20 or 30 years.
This is
and we saw it I'm just going to say, we saw it in the last term in terms of delayed justice, right? Amy Stevens passed away before she was able to get justice. Christian, the skydiver in Altitude Express, I can't remember his last name, he died before getting a chance to get justice. And so when you have a situation where people literally cannot live long enough to see their day in court, we've got a real problem, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say the issue of the conservative from the Federalist Society era and sort of the older through line is so important because, former Chief Justice Rehnquist was Roberts' mentor and a standing hawk. And really one of the main things that Roberts has carried through from the Rehnquist court is consistently limiting the number of people who can seek access to the court, the ways in which you can petition the court for redress if you've been harmed, the kinds of remedies that the court can give you if you've been injured. So it is literally like attacking avenues of justice for individuals at every step of the way. So do we have an answer to the Federalist Society? We've just spent a lot of time talking about how they are, one of the most nefarious and powerful institutions and doing so much work behind the scenes. What can we do about that? How can we answer that?
No, we don't have an answer because our billionaires like to run for president. instead of winning,
this is
right?
so depressing.
Our billionaires like to try to build a colony on Mars, or instead of the Federal Society endowment, based on what we can tell, is somewhere between $25 and $50 million. That is nothing. All right, that is peanuts in this society. Turns out the Supreme Court is cheap to buy. All right, it's Baltic Avenue on the board. If you just invested the money to buy it, right?
Yeah.
Our groups, and there are a lot of groups, our groups are chronically underfunded compared to the Federal Society. And I was talking about how they pick you out in law school. One of the things that I always try to tell people, because if you didn't go to like one of these schools, you really didn't have an opportunity to see it. But like, you know, you're at school, you're a student, you're hungry. Somebody's like, oh, come have a lunch and a talk and whatever, right? Well, when you go to the Federal Society lunch at Harvard Law School, man, there are lobster rolls and clam bisque, and you're just, oh, this is great. Absolutely, I will eat a lobster roll and listen to your indoctrination, sir. Absolutely, right? Mm-hmm. You go to the ACS, the American Constitutional Society thing, and it's like leftover Chinese. Like it's
This is very true.
It ain't got nothing, right? And so you don't hear the indoctrination, right? Again, I did not fall for it, but like put like this. When you think about how, like, you know, and we've seen this with Barrett and with Kavanaugh, how chummy and buddy everybody is. Well, it's because they all went to the same school and they all had the same bisque, right? So that's one problem, right? We're just underfunded up and down the system in terms of being able to start and attract law students, as well as run these massive, you know, advertising campaigns in favor of our justices or attacking the other side's justices. We're just outgunned in terms of money. But the other reason why the Federal Society is able to do what we're able to do is really, it's part of the problem with democratic politics in general. We have a bigger tent, right? So the Federal Society has gotten buy-in from all the other conservative constituent groups that they are the ones that are going to be in charge of judges, right? So all the religious organizations are just like, oh, the Federal Society, they'll handle the judges. The NRA, all the gun people, the Federal Society, they'll handle the judges. Any important conservative constituent group has ceded their judicial control to the Federal Society to tell them which judges are going to be good for them. The Democrats, no. You want to try to get a justice on the court without talking to the NAACP, good luck. You want to get the NAACP to get a justice through without talking to Planned Parenthood and NARAL, good luck. You want those two groups to like not talk to unions and the teachers unions and the good, right? So like we've got a bunch of different interest groups that all rightly want a say in what kind of justices that we put on the Supreme Court, but they don't all agree, and they haven't all given up that power to one organization, right? There's no one clearinghouse that says, okay, we're going to pick the judges that work best for all of us. Trust us. Nobody has that trust. And as an African American, I can't blame them, right? Like I understand that I would be reluctant to relinquish my voice and my ability to advocate for the kind of judges that I want to some white-run organization, right? Like I would just be reluctant to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a huge, and you know, Lombardo Legal has to have a say, and Voto Latina has, like everybody needs to have a say, and we don't have that kind of strong voice saying we're going to do it my way. Now, honestly, I had wished he's not gonna. Barack Obama could have done that, right? He could have. His post-presidency could have been, I'm going to pick all the judges, and everybody's going to trust me, and that's how we're going to, and everybody's going to give me some money, and everybody's going to trust me, and then that's how we're going to do it. Like, but you need, where we are right now is that you need somebody of that stature to be able to basically pacify and mollify all of our constituency groups to even start to really carve into the lead that the Federal Society has.
Wow.
If we had that.
So we're screwed. I'm sorry.
I knew that, but I was hoping
we were just gonna let that hang.
The power of Elie Mystal was somehow gonna make it different, but no.
Look, if we had more money, there's a lot that we can do. Like I said, the Supreme Court is cheap to buy. If we had more, if you gave me $15 million, I would know what to do, right? Like,
who would you put on the court?
And there are people.
Put on the court.
So right now,
and also, Biden, can we talk about the fact that the court is foreclosed out of Black women and Black people? I mean, Biden's talking about we're going to put a Black woman on the court. who are the black women that are judges that are going to be on the court that anybody knows? Like people, you know what I mean? These noteworthy named people, because we don't have that same avenue. No one came up to me. I went to UVA. You know what I mean? Like hella Republicans come out of UVA. No one came up to me and said, hey, you want to be a black Republican?
You want to clerk? You know,
I would have said, no one came to me and said, you want to clerk? No, I just took the first job at Latham and Watkins that I could find. Like, it's just, it's a different world for black attorneys. I mean, you worked in private practice too. Debevoise, I'm Alston Bird, Latham and Watkins, Simpson Thatcher. Like, I went through all these places because I couldn't find a place that fit for me. There was one firm that I worked at that was great. But aside from that, there's no room.
One of the reasons, and people need to understand this, is that, you know, I don't know about your situation. I was not the first person in my family to go to college, thank God. But I was the first person in my family to go to law school. And my family sacrificed a lot so that I could be there. You know, there were 3 or 4 years there where my mom and my sister didn't take a vacation so I could go to Harvard Law School, right? Mm-hmm. So now on the way out of Harvard Law School, I got one guy, you know, a district court person being like, I'll pay you $50,000 a year to be what I thought was like your stenographer, right? Or I've got Debevoise and Plimpton at that point offered me $140,000 a year to do whatever I did, right? Like that's as an African-American son who wanted to give back to his family, that was not a choice that I was capable of making kind of fairly, right? Like I felt like I owed it to my people to try to like earning lots of money. Like that just seemed fair.
It didn't work out, yeah.
It didn't work out for, you know, much to everybody's chagrin, but like I had to try. And so like you just don't have a lot of, you know, the clerkship pipeline is so, and for people to understand, the clerkship is the way that you get into all of these halls of power, right? The clerkship, a Supreme Court clerkship is the gold cap on a legal resume. To do that, you have to clerk usually for a year, sometimes 2 at a lower court and feed your way up. You need to get that first clerkship, you need to buddy up to the right professor. This is another way the Federal Society has really won. Even in liberal law schools, a lot of the clerkship coordinators, the professors who help people get clerkships, are themselves FedSoc people. The liberals are, you know, writing kind of treatises about, you know, civil rights law, and the conservatives are just like, you're going to clerk here, you're going to clerk there, and then that clerkship is going to lead to that clerkship, which is going to lead to the Supreme Court, which is going to lead to you being a professor or a judge or whatever. We just don't have that kind of infrastructure in play, and it's especially difficult for minority students and non-traditional students to figure out those avenues to power. That said, our bench is super deep because the Republican bench like basically only looks at white guys, and there's like a whole bunch of the rest of the country that we get to choose from because we have so much of a broader platform, right? So we have tons of qualified justices of every race, color, and creed you can think of. One of the fights that I try to be a part of, and I really like the group Demand Justice, they do a lot of this work too, is really trying to push Democrats to appoint more progressive judges when they get a chance to appoint judges, which is where you also would get some more kind of melanin representation up in this judiciary. So we've got tons of options. If you gave me 1 spot for a black woman, I've got 10 that I could put on. If you gave me 10 spots for black women, I've got 15 that I can put on, right? Like who are eminently qualified, brilliant, and would really move the law in the right direction. One particular pitch I'll put in is that, again, for a much expanded court, we talk a lot about kind of racial and gender diversity, but what we desperately need is more intellectual diversity on the Supreme Court. Right now, the 9 justices went to 2 law schools. Yeah. Harvard and Yale, right? That's bad. That's bad. That's bad. Yeah. I know these people. You don't want them deciding everything. An expanded court would have more representation from more non-traditional backgrounds. You would have our Supreme Court has always been heavily favored in form of former prosecutors. I think, as we can see with what's happening on our streets, that's not the best. It would be great to have some people with some more defense experience. You know, if you were gonna look, if a Democrat nominates a white guy, I mean, it's gonna be like, I'm a white guy, but I cured cancer. Like it's gonna be a while like before white guys really have can be put on the Supreme Court, given how much Trump has favored white cis hetero males. But if I had to pick a white guy, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, the current DA, former defense attorney in Philadelphia, is a brilliant man. I would love to see a person like him on the court. When we go back to Biden's promise to nominate Black women, I love the idea of Cheryl Eiffel, the current director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I love the idea of Christina Swarms, who's the director of the Innocence Project. My God, can you imagine a Supreme Court justice that has spent most of their life freeing people as opposed to jailing them? That would be amazing. That's something we've ever had before, right? So
or like a Melissa Murray, who's going to be in there with like the repro justice framing and
right. Melissa Murray. Yeah. Now there's a woman that understands the goddamn clerkship process and how to make that more fair. The other thing that people have to remember is the Constitution does not say that the Supreme Court justice has to be a lawyer. And there have been times in our history where where they haven't. And so anybody so they're, again, and especially in a world where there are a lot more justices, having people that maybe come from a non-legal background in certain situations, I wouldn't want a whole court of non-lawyers, but throwing in a non-lawyer here and there wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. What people might remember, Bill Clinton allegedly floated the idea of being a Supreme Court justice to Mario Cuomo. Cuomo didn't want it. He then went on to lose his re-election for New York State. That seat ended up going to Ginsburg, so I mean, it worked out. But that was a legitimate idea. If you had if people want to float Stacey Abrams' name as a Supreme Court justice, given how important voting rights are right now, I wouldn't be opposed to that. So have no fear about our bench. We've got people, not just for the Supreme Court, but up and down the system. We've got people ready and raring to go that would really open up the law and make it so much more accessible to different types of people. And so I'm excited about the opportunities. Should Biden win, McConnell lose, Democrats get a clue.
As a former legal aider, I'd love to see a legal aider on the bench at some point. Somebody who's actually helped poor people navigate the legal system, not even from the criminal justice standpoint, from just like trying to make sure your housing voucher doesn't get yanked out from under you because you've got someone living with you now. Like basic, don't be abused by the system kind of things, and understand and put some humanity on it.
Just for people watching who didn't go to law school or who don't understand how this stuff works, Supreme Court justices don't write their own opinions, right? So it's not like it's not the clerks are really the ones who do the heavy lifting. So it's not like a non-lawyer would be completely clueless about how things work because they would have people to help them. Like I feel
they got help.
I feel like there's this sort of mystery, this sort of like haze around what it is lawyers do and how it is courts work. Clerks are really like the unsung heroes of a lot of these courts. And so I think it would be perfectly acceptable and easy for a non-lawyer to pick up how these things operate with a good set of clerks.
To say nothing of the briefs, right? I mean, like, you got to remember, these appellate cases, it's not like they drop out of the sky, right? There's plaintiffs, there's a defense, there's briefs, and they write down what they think the law is. The other side writes down what they think the law is. And you could, if you were literate in the law, you could really just say, like, I like brief number 2, and just, it's, I like to demystify it. I don't want to pretend like it's not hard. It's hard. I don't want to pretend like the people who do it aren't smart. They're smart. Even Amy Coney Barrett, who, I again will spend the rest of my life disagreeing with. She's not dumb. She's a smart lady, right? Like these are smart people that do a fancy thing for a living. So I don't want to make it just like, oh, anybody can do it. But like way more people can do it. Like way more.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun, and we are absolutely at the end of our time. And I just looked up and I was like, oh, they're gonna kill me. We are done, and I have like 5 more questions to ask, and I can't ask any of them. So I have to wrap this up, unfortunately. Elie, thank you. This has been so much fun. I swear Imani and I will be bugging you again because like I said, I mean, we could talk about the courts for hours, and just being able to demystify the process, the justice system in general, the legal profession. I think it's really important, and especially now at such an important time in the zeitgeist, to say the least. Like, people need to have to know what's going on in these systems and to feel like they can participate and be empowered in that. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for everybody who joined this event. This has been so much fun. I was so nervous about moderating something on Zoom, and you all made me feel very loved. So thank you. But it has been just a really exciting few weeks for us at Rewire News Group, and we are just really happy to have you with us. If you care about the work that we do, I'm going to ask that you please head on over to rewirenewsgroup.com/donate and donate for our fall fundraising campaign. We've got a special gift lined up if you do, so that's exciting. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our newsletter, our YouTube channel, and of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug my podcast with Imani, Boom Lawyered. Please, we have a new season that drops next week. Well, it starts to drop next week, and we've got a lot of really good stuff lined up. That's not even without knowing what the court is going to do. So you don't want to miss it. Tomorrow, we have another event on Instagram at noon Eastern with our friend and sex educator, Cassandra Corrado. She has a new series for us called You Deserve Good Sex. It's on YouTube. It's amazing. You should check it out. For example, did you know blue balls are a myth? They are. Great, great content. Go check it out. But please, she's on Instagram live tomorrow at 12 noon. And so she'll answer questions if you've got them. So lots of good stuff. Again, Elie, thank you. This has been just a blast. And that's it. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I guess we'll see you on the tubes.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Cheers, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Elie.
Yep. Bye.